Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. No tamaki makoro ahau, ko Waters te whānau, ko Kimberley ahau, ka nui te mehe, kia koutou. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to you all. My name is Kimberley Waters, and it is my absolute pleasure on behalf of everyone at Hyundai New Zealand to welcome you here on this special occasion. Despite the challenges we've faced over the last 100 or so days, I can't keep count, it is wonderful to be able to host a very small group of you here today in Auckland and have so many of you at home or in the office join us via the live stream to recognise this milestone not only in our history but New Zealand's. The arrival of the XCIENT Fuel Cell truck signifies the progression and application of hydrogen technology in New Zealand, particularly for the heavy transport sector. Today we'll cover off an overview of the hydrogen technology, the investment that Hyundai is making, the trials that these trucks will enter next year. We're also very fortunate to have the Honourable Michael Wood, Minister of Transport, with us today, who will address the importance of hydrogen in transport. We'll share some details on the specifics of the truck, and then we'll open the floor for questions. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Hyundai New Zealand CEO, Andy Sinclair.
Tēnā koutou, everyone. I'm Andy Sinclair, CEO of Hyundai Motors New Zealand. Thank you all for coming today, and welcome to Hyundai New Zealand HQ, or close enough to it. As well as the members of Parliament from across Auckland that have joined us here today, I'd like to acknowledge our special guests, the Honourable Michael Wood and Mr. Kim, Consul General of Korea. It's not quite the launch we'd hoped due to COVID, but we're delighted to have a small number of current and future customers, partners and media with us here in person, and many others tuning in remotely. We appreciate your interest and support. We've invited you here today to see and hear about our hydrogen-powered fuel cell truck, known as the XCIENT. This is right here in front of me and behind all of you. It's not a drawing, it's not a concept, and it's certainly no longer a dream. It's a fully functioning, on-the-road, heavy-duty, working commercial vehicle that represents a shift in the energy paradigm away from fossil fuels to hydrogen. And it is a powerful solution to combating climate change here in New Zealand and around the world. My colleagues, Grant Dool, our National Manager for Hydrogen and Eco-Commercial Vehicles, and Gavin Young, Hyundai's Hydrogen Technical Manager, will tell you all about the vehicle itself and how it works, and will demonstrate it later on. While it's not my intention to delve deeply into the hows and whys of hydrogen, I'm going to share with you Hyundai's hydrogen journey and their global vision for 2040, and what has already been going on here in New Zealand with a roadmap for both the XCIENT and hydrogen vehicles and infrastructure. So let's look at Hyundai's global hydrogen journey. Hyundai Motors has been investing in and developing hydrogen technology for over 20 years now, and are proudly world leaders in fuel cell electric vehicle development, or XCEV for short. Hyundai has invested in excess of $9.8 billion into this journey, into technology refinements, into talent, into design, building business partnerships, and into developing vehicles that can utilise hydrogen safely and efficiently. In 2013, Hyundai launched the world's first mass-produced FCEV vehicle, a Tucson. The head of R&D in Seoul, Dr. Kim, claimed at the time that it cost 3 times as much to build as his house. The cost is coming down, but it will take more time before it is comparable to fossil-fueled vehicles. Only 5 years later, in 2018, we introduced the Nexo, and it is here behind you. The ability to build and run fully hydrogen-powered vehicles for family use is already here, just the fueling stations to come, but they are coming. As the journey continues, Hyundai has decided to start our larger scale commercialisation of hydrogen vehicles in the commercial vehicle space, thus the XCIENT truck we have here today. Commercial vehicles are large emitters of CO2, and that we believe that using hydrogen and electric vehicles across all forms of public transport, trains, planes, trams, buses and trucks, will make the biggest impact in the shortest amount of time. Vehicles move more freight and cargo than they do people. So by concentrating on vehicles that either move a lot of people all at once, like buses and trains, or carry freight, like the XCIENT here, we can do the most good in the shortest time as this technology continues to evolve. Here in New Zealand, the heavy transport makes up 4% of the national fleet and is responsible for 25% of transport emissions. So for us, it's a great place to start. Hyundai has a global vision for hydrogen by 2040. That vision is to make hydrogen energy available to everyone, everything and everywhere. The end result will be a totally carbon neutral solution brought about by a complete shift in the energy paradigm. Hyundai will apply fuel cell systems to all types of mobility. I've already seen hydrogen trailer drones, hydrogen performance sports cars, and hydrogen relief and rescue vehicles, along with the examples on the screen. And further out, the technology will be applied to all aspects of society, including homes, buildings, and power plants. It will provide a powerful and pragmatic solution to climate change. However, it cannot be done alone. It requires buy-in from government, it requires partnerships throughout the industry, it will need a lot of people and businesses, just like you all here today, working together across the chain to bring it quickly to everyday life. So for all of you here today, witnessing the launch of our XCIENT truck, Hyundai plans to be the first global manufacturer to apply fuel cell technology across all of their commercial vehicles by 2028. And that isn't very far away. Back in the summer of 2020, 45 XCIENT trucks, just like this one, were delivered as part of the first mass production hydrogen vehicle delivery in the world to Switzerland, where they are currently being used across several industries, including freight, logistics, and supermarket chains. The Swiss program has been a huge success. Each and every month, over 210,000 kilometres of zero emissions travel has been completed, saving 130 tonnes of CO2 each month along the way. Drivers are reporting their experience as being safe, quiet, sturdy, and a very good drive, all while carrying normal freight and cargo payloads, and no breakdowns or major technology faults either. Those 45 XCIENT trucks in Switzerland will grow to 1,600 units by 2025. Now back to New Zealand. So as not to be outdone by our northern cousins, we at Hyundai here in New Zealand will be demonstrating 5 of these XCIENT trucks, which will be in service from around April next year. As a 100% New Zealand-owned distributor, We will be partnering with other New Zealand businesses who share a similar vision to us to demonstrate FCEV in our market and to help accelerate the uptake of hydrogen technology here in New Zealand. It's incredibly exciting and shows real progress towards totally eco-friendly motoring and our country's commitments to climate change and global emissions targets. So a shout out to the many New Zealand companies involved in New Zealand hydrogen future, and especially to the help of ECA. Some of you are here today joining us, and certainly the momentum is building and success is just around the corner. I'd also like to acknowledge the work of the New Zealand Hydrogen Council. And this slide shows you some of the great progress they're making and the projects they are supporting to help build our hydrogen infrastructure. Finally, here in New Zealand, the launch of XCIENT today is a historic milestone. We're just the third country in the world to have access to these XCIENT trucks, following Switzerland and, of course, South Korea. With our abundance of renewable energy resources, our government strive for a green, sustainable environment, and the fantastic support and momentum we enjoy from the private sector, we have a wonderful opportunity to help fast-track the green hydrogen economy as New Zealand's next major commodity. With our ability to produce green hydrogen fuel in abundance, hydrogen will also offer us a significant trade opportunity, as it is highly scalable and transportable. And almost every country is looking out for renewable energy solutions. Hydrogen is one of the most powerful and pragmatic solutions for answering climate challenges. So you can see why we're so excited about the XCIENT trial that will commence next year. And for you who are eagle-eyed, you'll see that we'll be using the Swiss specification trucks to get our program underway. We'll convert these trucks to New Zealand configuration over the next few months. So before I hand over, thank you again for supporting us in the launch today. XCIENT is the result of over 20 years of world-leading research and development, and fits squarely with Hyundai's global 2040 hydrogen pathway. The rest of the world is firmly behind hydrogen as a clean and sustainable energy platform, and now New Zealand. For all of us here today, we're in a position to benefit from Hyundai's hydrogen leadership and what will be a positive hydrogen future. Thank you. Now I'd like to welcome the Honourable Michael Wood, Minister of Transport, onto the stage to say a few words.
Kia ora koutou katoa, anyang haseo, and a very good afternoon to everyone who's here. Andy, can I firstly acknowledge you for your comments and leadership in this area. To Mr Kim, our Consul General as well, acknowledge you, sir, very good to have you here today. And my parliamentary colleagues, of whom there are a few, Simon O'Connor, Erica Stanford and Simeon Brown, acknowledging you here as well. And everyone else who's here today in the car park and also watching us on live stream who has been a part of this journey. I'm enormously excited to be here for the launch of XCIENT, and perhaps a little symbol of that is that this was pretty much my one slot to get my first haircut after 6 months, but I'd much rather be here as a part of this project. And I think for this to be, as Andy told us, for us to be only the third country in the world alongside Korea and Switzerland who currently has this piece of technology here is a real vote of confidence in Hyundai New Zealand, and also the direction and the leadership that we as a country are taking in that mission that we all have to decarbonise our transport sector. For our government, this is quite simply one of the top priorities that we have. Climate change is not something that's sitting out there in the future for us to be worried about. It's a challenge that is upon us as we speak. And the urgent need for us to transition our economy and our society to a decarbonised way of living is one that we need to take action on now, to avoid catastrophic outcomes for ourselves and for future generations. And I'm really pleased about the commitments that we saw coming through in COP21 recently in that respect. In our transport sector, we face real challenges. Transport in New Zealand is our second largest emitter, around about 20% of our net emissions overall and 47% of our CO2 emissions. And the biggest challenge we face is that of all of the sectors, transport's had the worst trajectory over the last 30 years. Our emissions have increased by about 90%. And what the Independent Climate Commission tells us is that if we want to meet our targets of decarbonising our economy by 2050 and to get about halfway there by 2035, then we'll need to reduce our transport emissions by approximately 41% by 2035. So after a long period of increases, we need to stop that increase and start turning it around pretty quickly. And Andy's right that we've got to do a number of big things here. The first is that we have to recognise that it's right across the transport system. So a lot of our focus to date has been on the light vehicle fleet, and that's because it is the biggest emitter across our transport system. And so those measures that we are advancing, like the Clean Car Standard, the Clean Car Discount, work on a biofuels mandate, are all enormously important measures to reduce our emissions. And that progress is happening. In the first 3 months after the Clean Car Standard was introduced in July, we reduced the average emissions of vehicles coming into the New Zealand fleet by more than we had reduced them in the previous 8 years. And that is an indication of how strong a tool it is. But Andy's right that we also have to look to the heavy vehicle fleet as well. 3% of the overall fleet, but currently around about 25% of the emissions profile. And what our Ministry of Transport modelling tells us is that if we just leave things to go as they are at the moment, then by the 2040s we will be emitting more from the heavy fleet than we are from the light fleet. So initiatives like the XCIENT and further work between government and the private sector to deal with these challenges in the heavy vehicle fleet is enormously important. We've set out a number of key steps and objectives that we need to achieve, and these are currently being consulted upon in the consultation on the emissions reduction plan. There are 4 key outcomes that we need to achieve. We need to, across all vehicles, all cars and light vehicles, reduce our VKT by 20%. We need to increase zero-emission vehicles to 30% of the light fleet by 2035. And we need to reduce emissions from freight transport by 25% by 2035. And that's where initiatives like the XCIENT are going to be enormously important. And so again, I just acknowledge Hyundai for that long history of investment and caring about this issue enough to actually start taking some tangible steps. More broadly, I'm enormously heartened by the partnerships that I see forming up across the sector. We as a government don't believe that we're going to get to these outcomes just by a leave it to the market approach. We believe that the job of government is to set a clear framework and policies that are ambitious and drive us forward. But we won't get there unless we partner up across the public sector, across the private sector, and across communities and NGOs who want to play a significant role here as well. And so we've got great initiatives like this, great initiatives like the Sustainable Business Council's low-carbon decarbonisation pathway for heavy freight that I think is enormously important as well. What is very clear in amongst all of that is that hydrogen does have an extremely important role to play as we move to decarbonise the sector. It's going to be a critical part of the clean energy mix that will lead to a more sustainable future for New Zealand. And this initiative, along with others, are really beginning to gather steam, and I think will in the coming years as well. Hydrogen's going to have an important role to play alongside EVs and alongside biofuels in that bigger picture of how we decarbonise the system. The government is taking a significant role here. We published a document called A Vision for Hydrogen, a core baseline strategy for how we achieve this shift back in 2019. In early 2022, we'll start the next stage of our hydrogen strategy by developing a very clear roadmap that'll set out the challenges that need to be resolved for hydrogen's use in our economy. And that's going to involve key questions about the kind of nationwide infrastructure that we need to make it efficient and effective for fleets to transition to this kind of technology. Another really important part of our approach is obviously the investment approach that we take with the private sector. And so that's why I'm really pleased that this project and many others have been supported strongly by ECA, who are really leaning in strongly to the hydrogen transition. In Budget 2021 this year, we've increased the funding through the Low Energy Vehicles Fund so that we can partner up with organisations like Hyundai and others to get more and more of these initiatives out there. And increasingly what I think we're going to see is a shift from getting demonstration technologies out on the road to looking at how we can partner to really scale up these initiatives and start getting wider use out there. I also noted up on the screen before mention of Hiringa, which is one of our key partnerships for developing a core baseline hydrogen refuelling infrastructure across key parts of New Zealand. So there's a lot of work that's going on, but it's initiatives like this that really bring it to life. So ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, can I again thank Hyundai New Zealand and Hyundai International for that leadership role that you are playing here. We as government want to be continuing to partner with you to just keep driving this on. I don't think that there is anything more important that we have in front of us. If I round back to my comments at the beginning, for too many decades with climate change bearing down upon us, too little action has been taken. The moment is upon us now. The expectations of the communities that we all serve and we all are a part of are very, very clear, that they expect us to be taking action on this issue. By investing in XCIENT, by getting it out here on the road, Hyundai New Zealand, you're putting your money where the mouth is, your mouth is, and we as government are right here beside you on this journey to decarbonise our economy and our society. So once again, I acknowledge everyone who's been part of this journey and very much look forward to the rest of the presentation and getting up in the cab very shortly. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Minister Wood. That's pretty good information there, and really happy to have you and other members of Parliament here today. Kia ora, everyone, both local and, of course, those of you who are streaming online at the moment. Hydrogen is the first chemical element on the periodic table. It is the lightest, most abundant, and roughly 75% of all matter, and it is one of the oldest elements in the universe. Here on Earth, hydrogen is found in more complex and not so complex molecules like water. Although for hydrogen to be used in its pure form, it has to be extracted. And this can be achieved through green and eco-friendly processes. Hydrogen is the fuel of stars through nuclear reaction. It is a great energy carrier, and it can be very useful for an energy source and even used as a fuel due to its high energy content based on its weight. So how are we able to use hydrogen power in a transportation application? Well, it's done so through a fuel cell device. A fuel cell generates electricity through an electrochemical reaction, which often involves hydrogen and oxygen. On the screen, you'll see a very basic illustration of a fuel cell stack. This is a collection of fuel cells, and the best way to describe them is wafer-thin type plates that are all neatly stacked together, and you can have as many as 400 of these cells in one stack. And as you can see, their size doesn't really matter, because even in this size, this little fuel cell here is able to produce a small amount of electrical current. So now it's time for us to see just how many of you can remember some of school's science and chemistry. On the screen are two very basic illustrations of a hydrogen atom and how the operating principle of a fuel cell works. The hydrogen atom consists of one negatively charged electron, which orbits around a positively charged proton. Hydrogen is colourless, odourless, and a tasteless gas, and its molecular formula is H2. Looking at the fuel cell, composes of two electrodes, on the one side an anode, and on the other side a cathode. Between these two electrodes is a catalyst, or a polymer electrolyte membrane, or alternatively known as a proton exchange membrane. As the hydrogen gas is processed on the anode side, that negatively charged electron separates from the proton. That proton is then able to pass through that semi-permeable membrane, hence the name proton exchange. And it moves through to the proton through the proton semi-permeable membrane through to the cathode side. That negatively charged electron is now forced to travel through an electrical circuit, and it's the movement of these electrons is what generates our electricity. We're able to use that electricity to power our electric EV motor, or we're able to harness that and store it in a high voltage battery and use it for later. On the other side, back at the cathode, the proton, electron, and then we add oxygen to the equation, all combine, and that gives us water molecules and vapor, which is our byproduct of this reaction. One fuel cell can generate up to 1 volt of electricity, and as I previously mentioned, there are up to 400 cells in a fuel cell stack, so that's a potential 400 volts. There is no moving parts, no combustion, fuel cells operate silently, no carbon emissions, extremely reliable and safe. Bringing this all together for a brief overview of how this looks into the XCIENT fuel cell, the main components is that we have not one but 2 fuel cell stacks. Accompanying this is a 72 kilowatt hour high voltage 630 volt lithium polymer battery. The battery acts as a buffer, and that can use the electrical energy to ensure that we have a constant supply to our electric motor. Furthermore, the fuel cell stacks can recharge the battery, and we can even recuperate some of the kinetic energy to also top up the batteries. Overall, the fuel cell operating principle and driving principle is that very similar to a hybrid electric vehicle of today. Instead of having liquid fuel tanks, we now have hydrogen gas tanks. Instead of having internal combustion engines, we now have fuel cell stacks. These systems are extremely modular. So if you want more power, you add more stacks. If you want to go further range, you simply add more tanks. I cannot stress how incredibly exciting it is for us to have this technology here today, and more importantly, have the ability to actually showcase it for you here in New Zealand. So thank you for that opportunity, and I will now hand over to Grant, who will run through some of the key stats on the XCIENT fuel cell. Thank you.
It's excellent. Well, hey, thank you, Gavin. Look, that was a wonderful insight into some of the technology that's happening inside the fuel cell itself. It's always fascinating to listen to Gavin talk about that topic. He's very, very passionate, and I think probably one of the leading specialists in New Zealand on this technology. So thanks again, Gavin. Hey, what I'm going to do over the next few minutes is really just take you a little bit through how the fuel cell technology's integrated into our vehicle and how it's going to work on the road. So one of the things that you will have noticed for sure is there's some really big round things at the back of the chassis. So these are our fuel tanks. So this is what the hydrogen goes in, but they don't stay in that position. That's technically our transport position for moving the vehicle around. When it has a body constructed on it, the tanks will be positioned in a vertical stack behind the cab, which makes it a very efficient sort of packaging. So, right, I'll just move into where these key components sit around the vehicle itself. So directly behind the cab, you can see those blue tanks that are stacked up behind the cab where we've got our fuel contained. They are 7 hydrogen tanks, and they contain approximately 31 kilograms of hydrogen on board, which is what we would call our fuel load. Directly under the cab, where we'd normally have a diesel engine, we have our fuel stacks that Gavin's been talking about. So on the XCIENT, we use 2 fuel stacks. They each have 400 volts, as Gavin was talking about. We have one sort of slightly positioned behind the other. Just as a reference on, let's say, packaging, our fuel cell in the Nexo is approximately the same size and approximately the same output as what we use in the truck. So we do have a commercial version of it in the truck, but the power output is roughly the same. So it gives you an idea of the sort of energy we can produce to move a car. We have 2 of them moving a truck, which is very, very heavy with its full payload. If we move back just behind the tanks, in between the chassis, we have a very high output electric motor. So we've got a 350 kilowatt electric motor positioned central in the chassis. It's got around 2,237 newton meters of torque. So that would be an equivalent performance, I guess, to a 470 horsepower truck by direct conversion. However, this is electric, so the power delivery is very different to diesel. We've got a linear torque delivery, and I hear from the Swiss colleagues that the performance is very, very good, and there's no complaints from anybody. Everyone enjoys power. So this drives in turn a 6-speed Allison transmission, which is mounted directly behind, and then through a conventional differential at the rear, putting the power to the road. To one side of the vehicle, we've got a 72 kilowatt battery pack. So this is 3 electric batteries making up a combined 72 kilowatts. Again, to put perspective on that, that's around the same battery size we would use in an electric vehicle today. So let's say our Ioniq 5 electric car would have around the same battery size as this truck has got. So the battery is really used for the collection of surplus energy, and it just helps the whole system work. But it just shows you the compactness of all of the equipment in the truck. Now, regenerative braking as well. So under deceleration, we recuperate the braking energy, and that will go back into the battery as a storage. A couple of things that always come up is about fuel cell electric versus battery electric. Well, quite simply, we believe in both technologies. They both have their place. For battery electric vehicles, that's more predominantly, let's say, justifiable in the light vehicle sector at the moment. When we get to heavy vehicles, there really is only one option. Battery electric cannot do it. You know, these trucks work 10, 15 hours a day non-stop. The charging times are long. And I think the big thing with batteries is to have the sort of energy on board to really shift loads, we would need to have an equivalent of 600 kilowatt hours in our battery packs on board to move the freight that we're talking about moving. They're heavy and they're quite slow to recharge. So in heavy transport, really we see the only option, which is hydrogen. So very fast refueling and good distance and fairly light, so it leaves space for payload. So I'll just kind of recap on those key points. So 350 kilowatt engine, so very, very powerful, I should say, motor now, because we're talking electricity, not diesel. So a 350 kilowatt motor, so very, very powerful motor driving this. This particular truck, we're using a 6x2 axle configuration, which you'll see shortly. We've also got a steering rear tag axle, which we will be doing some trialling of that technology. It's very much a European type of configuration that we've got with this vehicle. 28-tonne GVM payload from the manufacturer and a 42-tonne gross combined mass from the manufacturer. Now, in New Zealand, it will operate at lower loads than this due to our current road regulations. But what we're trying to demonstrate here is this is a seriously heavy-duty truck. It's not a toy. It's got an awful lot of power, and it's built for very heavy and durable loads. Range, 400 kilometres from one tank of fuel, which is 31 kilograms of hydrogen. That's Auckland to Palmerston North in one trip. And I think one of the other things that we perhaps don't think about is we've heard a whole lot of noise pollution while we've been sitting outside here. This is very, very, very quiet. So we're going to improve the quality of our life and environments with reducing noise. And for the operators, it's very quiet, it's vibration-free, and obviously emission-free. And really the big thing that we've all been talking about today is CO2 reduction. So each one of these trucks that goes on the road in place of a diesel equivalent is going to save us 50 tonnes of CO2 per year, and that's based on an 80,000 kilometre typical commercial use. So, hey, look, I think with that, we've pretty much reached the end of this session, and what we'd like to do now is move into a little bit of Q&A with our team. So I'm going to hand over to Kimberly, who will coordinate that, but we're happy to take some questions.
course of this session, we're just going to have our masks off so that we can answer your questions. Now, just in terms of just to make sure that we can hear you clearly, if you do have a question, if you could please just stand up, say your name, where you're from, and then ask your question. If you've got a question that you'd like to direct to any one particular person, then please feel free to do so. So I'd like to open up the floor to questions. So with regards to body configurations, yep, Grant.
Okay, so for the body configurations, there's a number of configurations that are suitable for the vehicle. So really what we're going to be doing with these particular vehicles is it will depend on the end customer that we're working with, but they can easily be used as a, let's say a curtain side type freight situation. And we're really targeting the freight sector where we can get some high mileage, some decent distance, and some real user trial going on with the vehicles and some key statistics, typical fuel consumptions, performance on hills. So that's really what we're after. So it's probably more client or customer centric, but it certainly suits a wide range of applications. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, thanks, William. Just in terms of trailers, being able to tow trailers.
Sorry. Yeah, absolutely, William. So at the moment we have a technical gross combined mass of 42 tonnes. So in its current configuration, we can legally go on the road at a combined mass of 39 as it sits, 39 tonnes. And I think there's a potential to go a little higher than that. So that would be a truck and trailer combination. So yeah, very, very applicable to that. And in actual fact, it's one of the benefits of hydrogen, I think.
Hi, once again from the Hyundai. I just wanted to know, are there any plans for expanding the development of hydrogen in New Zealand?
Expanding the development of hydrogen
For Hyundai?
for Hyundai specifically.
Okay, Ian, I can answer that for you. Certainly this is a trial with an initial 5 trucks. Part of that trial is for us to understand how they operate in New Zealand conditions, but it is fully our intention to commercialise hydrogen trucks in New Zealand following the trial.
Sorry, Jack Group on this. How long is the trial going to last for? How long do you propose the trial is going to last?
Yep, the length of time of the trial.
I think the real answer is probably 8 or 10 years, because these trucks are here, they're serious, they're a production model. I mean, we're the only ones with a mass-produced truck in the world. We're bringing them in to start the trial, let's say, over the next couple of years, but I think the reality is we'll still be looking at data for several years to come, and hope that answers that.
Have we, from the previous trials that we've run overseas, have we got good information about the mechanical efficiency, wear and tear, and how that compares to diesel vehicles?
Yep. So with regards to comparing to diesel vehicles, any learnings from overseas?
Yes, we have. So the maintenance costs are significantly less, and I think if we look at the maintenance schedules, the items that need to be checked and are relatively few in comparison to a diesel vehicle. We're also in dialogue with our Swiss counterparts, which we're very, very fortunate that they're a little ahead of us, so they've got some very good data, feedback from drivers, fuel consumption, and let's say early maintenance data. So again, I think that's I guess it's a huge benefit of being part of a global network like Hyundai, and having the Swiss program that we can work with them as well as the teams at Hyundai themselves.
Kathy. The storage pressure?
That's a max of 350 bar. So that's XCIENT 350 and the Nexo 700.
the difference between the two?
Well, firstly, for a commercial application, having a lower pressure allows the quicker refueling turnaround time. And then, of course, you've also got the capacity at which the hydrogen is on board. And then when you're dealing with a smaller application in a passenger vehicle, you would tend to have a higher pressure, smaller sized tanks.
We are the first outside of Switzerland. Clearly they're operating in South Korea, country of origin, but outside of Switzerland we are the first.
I think we're just a fraction ahead of the US.
Fabulous. All right, if there are no further questions, then we'll conclude that. Let you gentlemen step down, and if you do have any additional questions, please direct them to us later. So once again, thank you to those of you here in Auckland who were able to join us today, and to those of you streaming. I trust that you gained a lot of insight in Hyundai's investment, both globally and locally, in hydrogen technology, the benefits of the application of this technology in the heavy transport sector, and the trial that we're about to embark on. It's meant a lot to us to be able to share this moment with you all, and we trust you'll follow our journey over the coming months as we start to see these trucks on New Zealand roads. So that concludes the formalities. So I'd now like to invite those of you present here today over to the truck for a walk around. And for those of you viewing online, we prepared something earlier. Mihi kia koe, mo te wā. Thank you very much.
We're just going to have a quick walk around with the XCIENT Fuel Cell truck. And the first thing I would like to bring to your attention is these hydrogen gas fuel tanks that are actually mounted to the rear of the chassis. This is in its transportation position, and in a real application, these tanks will be vertically stacked right here, just behind the cab. Let's take a look at some of the key components of the fuel cell XCIENT truck. As it's powered by hydrogen, we have two fuel cell systems and powertrains located right here, just beneath the cab. This here is the fuel cell stack. We have the fuel processing system where the hydrogen gas goes into the fuel cell stack. And on the other side, we have the oxygen, which when that electrochemical reaction takes place, gives us our byproduct of water molecules and water vapor. This section of the XCIENT fuel cell truck is sort of our power distribution center, where we have a lot of high voltage systems here that need to provide electrical power to our electric traction motor and our high voltage battery. Moving along, here we have the high voltage battery that forms part of the total fuel cell powertrain system. Rough weight is around 220 kilograms, and it has an energy capacity of 72 kilowatt hours. In the center here we have the EV traction motor. It is a very high capacity 350 kilowatt capacity motor, and it's able to produce around 2,237 Newton meters of torque. Coupled to that, we have a 6-speed Allison automatic transmission, and then we'll just make our way around to the other side. In terms of safety, once these hydrogen tanks are stacked behind the cab, there are a series of fail-safes and monitoring systems to monitor for any hydrogen leaks. And here are a couple examples of that on top of the stacks as well. As soon as a leak is detected, the system will completely shut down and alert the driver at the same time. There are a few other auxiliary systems that need to be powered. For example, here is an auxiliary air compressor that provides the compressed air required for our air suspension and our braking system. Over here we have a conventional 24-volt battery. Again, all of this is purely charged through the high voltage system and through our low voltage DC converters. This section of the fuel cell powertrain is basically our cooling system bay. Here we have a whole series of radiators and coolant, and this provides the cooling and thermal management systems required for the fuel cell stack due to that electrochemical reaction. It does create a bit of heat, and that stack needs to be cooled and monitored. Same is to go with the high voltage battery and our electric motor, and as well as our automatic transmission system. When the tanks are vertically stacked behind the cab, our refueling receptacle will be situated here. And just for the sake of showing you what it looks like, the operating pressure of these tanks is up to 350 bar, which gives it a pretty good refueling time benefit in the sense that the lower pressure enable that tanks to be refueled in a much quicker capacity and a faster turnaround. In the cabin aspects of it, it's a very European style designing with all of the technologies and creature comforts that you would expect to have in a vehicle that's been produced in this day and age, and a few safety technologies as well, with forward collision assist and lane keeping assist technology too. Accompanied with that with smartphone integration, so that keeping the driver's hands off any distractions is kept to an absolute minimum too. So what I'm going to do now is just jump in, power up the fuel cell XCIENT truck, and you'll be able to hear for yourself just how quiet it is. So right now the truck is running and we're almost ready to go and hit the road. Kia ora everyone.